Good morning, everyone. I'm Dave Deptula, Dean of the Mitchell Institute. And today we're really pleased that Ms. Lauren Knausenberger, the Chief Information Officer of the Department of the Air Force, can join us to discuss a critical side of modern warfare, information. Now, by way of introduction, I'd like to explain that Ms. Knausenberger leads 2 directorates and supports tens of thousands of cyber operations and support personnel around the globe. Her portfolio is valued at over $17 billion. She provides oversight of the Air Force's IT enterprise, which includes everything from investment strategies to networks and cloud computing. She's also responsible for the department's cybersecurity. Perhaps most importantly, she integrates Air Force warfighting and mission support capabilities by networking and securing air, space, and terrestrial assets. So welcome, Lauren, and thanks very much for taking the time to be here today. What I'd like to do is kind of give you the stage, if you will, for a couple of minutes to give us a little bit of background on just what you do and your organization. So over to you.
All right, sure. Well, good morning. I'm glad to be here. It looks like you have an awesome audience out here today as well. And I think you covered the intro pretty well. I'll add that have 2 little girls at home and have been at this about 5.5 years, not in this job, but the Department of the Air Force writ large. And it has been just a real pleasure to work some of the complex problems that we have. I tell folks that have not had the opportunity to serve that there is no other place where you can find just really wicked hard problems of this magnitude that matter this much with people that are this passionate about getting after it. So I love my job and especially love the people that I am working with, and looking forward to our discussion this morning.
Well, very good. Let's kind of jump right in. And what I'd like to do is start by asking you a little bit about some wider strategic and geopolitical views. For the past decade or so, China and Russia have been talking about becoming more informationalized in their warfighting. And we also value the role that information plays in warfare. And that's why the services are pursuing concepts like joint all-domain command and control. So I think I'd like to, and more importantly, the audience would like to hear how you view the elevation of information in warfare and what role you see your office playing in that process.
Absolutely. So I would say that information plays an increasing role in everything. And in our personal lives, we kind of, it just happens naturally. We use information for just about everything. I definitely check my commute before I head out in the office. You're looking for the best deal online. A lot of companies make money by predicting what your shopping habits will be, and our intelligence community, of course, has done an incredible job for decades, probably a century now, doing really great things with information. Our adversaries, namely China and Russia, of course, have written more about this, as have we, about the role of informationized warfare, and have made big investments. And I'll share some of those things. They think about it a lot like we do. Offensive cyber operations, how can you disrupt something completely using assets in the digital domain, sometimes only having a digital domain effect, shutting down a network, sometimes having a kinetic effect. If you shut down something in an HVAC unit, there are things that can happen, for instance, in the real world as a result of that digital effect. You can get information from other networks through offensive means. Defensive cyber operations, where you are defending against things that others are doing. Maybe you're defending against the effects of latent malware in your networks. And then, of course, your network operations and your cybersecurity. All of the systematic things that you do, your knock and your sock, to look across your network. And a lot of those things do fall into my purview or the purview of the A26. And we work very, very in an aligned manner with our 16th Air Force commander, who is in charge of the operational side of all of these things, to be as orchestrated as possible and to drive things in a strategic way. The really interesting place here too is when you look into more kind of information warfare, psychological effects of some of these things too. I think that we we understand network operations, we understand having data at our fingertips. I think we understand better than we do the effects of when you have things that an adversary might be influencing. And I'll give you maybe a silly example of psychological effects. This will be a silly example. Anybody that hears this in your audience will know it's a joke, you know. But let's say the most effective means that we've seen our adversaries use. Someone says something for real at first. So I put out a post, stormtroopers are walking down Clarendon Boulevard, you know, just a mile away from here, and just causing a ruckus in downtown Arlington. So I post that for real. Maybe I post it as a joke, you know, maybe it's Star Wars Day, maybe it's Halloween. Maybe I just made something up and I just wanted to, you know, be silly. Right. But we have adversaries that look at real things that we say and that perpetuate that message. And so all of a sudden, many people see stormtroopers are walking down the streets of Clarendon. And then maybe someone says, oh my goodness, the stormtroopers are now walking down the streets of Boise. And you have this message that started out very, very small that would not have gotten a lot of airtime. And all of a sudden you can see the traffic going through where bots that did not originate in the United States were perpetuating whatever message they decided to do. And all of a sudden this message sounds very, very loud. So it's one thing to dismiss something as a human when you heard it once. You can say, oh, that's just crazy aunt such and such, or that's silly, or that was made up. There's no original source from this. But when you start seeing it everywhere, because there was an intentional push to show it to you that many times, as humans, we start to wonder, well, is that actually true? Because I saw it from so many different sources that I think I trust, and that is real. And spectrum warfare, increasingly something that we really have to pay attention to. So definitely a hot space. And when we say information warfare or informationized warfare, or using information for warfare purposes, fighting in a digital domain, that means you have to do a lot of things really well to have the information that you need. You have to have connectivity. You have to have compute wherever you need it, and networks. You have to be able to get data from anywhere to anywhere. You have to have software that makes it easy for a warfighter to interpret that picture and to make a decision. And really the next step is intelligent warfare. And the Chinese are writing about this more and more too. And that's when you take all of that foundation, that tech stack, and those ConOps that you apply to that tech stack in an informationized environment, and you start to leverage AI. And I'm sure we'll chat about AI today. But that next step, once you start leveraging AI to bring all of those things together into a converged battle space, that's when you really get to more of an intelligent warfare environment, which is where we are all trying to drive at the moment.
Well, that's fascinating. And as you've been talking, I'm reminded of the fact that if you look at our security pillars, that everyone out there in the audience is familiar with, the DIME, you know, we've got diplomacy, we've got information, military, and economic pillars. We have cabinet level agencies for 3 of the 4. The one that we don't is information. Now, there's a lot of reasons for that, and we don't need to go into all of the discussion, but you laid it out very nicely why information is so important, and it's becoming a fundamental element, not just the military piece, but how our entire nation's security operates. What are your thoughts in terms of needing to take an additional organizational level step, if you will, in codifying an organization that focuses full-time on information in the national security environment?
So we sort of do have that. You know, we have the intelligence community whose whole currency is data and information. We have CIOs who deal in information. We have a DoD CIO who is there to really as a unifying function among our milled-up CIOs. We have CISA, who is very focused on cybersecurity across all the agencies. I think if we stood up a federal agency and said, you're in charge of information, we would probably find a way to screw it up in some way. But I do think that there's more that we can do to better, certainly in connecting dots and leveraging things that already exist. But that's where I see the momentum going. I think that we're all aligned that we want to move to a world where we can use whatever connection we can get. And we are very close to a world with ubiquitous connectivity, where maybe we don't have to carry around quite as much gear as we used
Right.
to just get a connection. You have all the connections that you used to have. You have more mobile connections. You have more space connections. There are more places where you can connect. We have pretty solid compute with a number of very, very large companies who also care about national security, and we can leverage what they have built. And then we have more and more traditional and non-traditional members of our defense industrial base who are helping us to write software that really does work. And we are building more of these things into our weapon systems. Probably one of the most exciting trends that I am seeing is that even when we don't say, I want you to work together, we have our big defense industrial base partners like Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, SAIC, Leidos. They are partnering with those big commercial companies, and they are coming to us with an integrated solution. So instead of what would have happened even 10 years ago, well, we'll build our own network and we'll get our own connectivity and we'll bring in our own circuits, and then we'll build the whole stack in this one new place on base and nothing shall connect. Industry is getting together and saying, hey, let's make this the standard. We're at the table, but industry is helping to drive it. And that's exactly how it should be. And then also, industry is partnering with the cloud providers. Hey, we're just going to do this cloud native. We're going to work together. We're going to do it at the appropriate level of classification all the way up to SAP cloud. And we are going to start here. We're not going to be migrating this in 10 years. And so I see a convergence where people are realizing we do have to work together. There is enough, there's enough revenue for us to all make. There is enough mission benefit for us, and we have to do this for our country.
Oh, very good. Segue into a topic that you mentioned earlier, and that's this whole notion of artificial intelligence and machine learning. Can you talk a bit about how they're going to play such a critical role in the future digital environment and how they might shape our operational concepts to come?
Absolutely. So I'll share a couple things, both philosophically and actual today. So of course, AI, as we talk about it, is a very broad range of topics, all the way from just basic automations, all the way through neural networks, deep learning, and we're doing some very interesting things in all of those areas of AI right now. Some just in the lab, some on the battlefield, some embedded in things that we are building today. We have to automate more. That's kind of a first step. If we try to do everything today manually, leveraging the same processes that we always have, we're not going to have the speed that we need for any of our kill chains. And I'll give an example for humanitarian assistance and disaster recovery, because that is a mission everybody cares about. And it actually is an Air Force mission. I don't know how many people know that. But we are.
Well, I hope a lot. I happen to be the Joint Force Air Component Commander for Operation Unified Assistance, which was a tsunami relief in the Pacific in 2005. And that was a huge operation. But anyway. Go ahead.
So I'm going to start asking you questions then, because we have an expert at the table. But I think a lot of people don't necessarily know that we have this very humanitarian part of our mission set. And so think about either the Coast Guard trying to rescue someone at sea, or trying to do a tsunami response, or trying to recover after a hurricane. There are so many AI use cases. What do the models say about what the damage will be, and where should I put the water and the supplies so that they will be closest to the damage but not get wiped out by the damage? If I have space imagery and I am trying to look across miles of ocean to find a person who is floating after a shipwreck, how do I tell the difference between person, wave top, trash? How do I zoom in on that huge portion of ocean and help to find out exactly where this person is, so that I'm not, if I waste an hour, they may drown. And likewise with hurricane response, I can have drones go around. I can see who needs to be rescued and maybe what assets I have nearby to rescue them. Do I need a boat? Do I need a helicopter? Being able to optimize that rescue, and how long can that person hold on to that tree? How long before that water rises above the roof of that house? Those are things that you can have a person calculating that. A person probably has to be in the loop, but that optimization engine, we'd have to have so many people in that war room, and we just generally don't. same thing with some of our missions. So one of our early successes with AI was with predictive maintenance for aircraft. And of course, every aircraft, airplane, airline company uses AI in some way for predictive maintenance, and we were doing more of that. We had a problem with our exit doors. Sometimes the sensor would fail and the door would open, which at a time we did not expect it to open. This is a safety issue. It also causes a lot of problems with drag on the aircraft. It breaks other things. Really bad problem. So A, we were able to fix that. We could see the pattern of it happening, but B, we could predict when that sensor would fail so that we could replace the sensor before it did and avoid all of that downstream damage. And so we've been able to actually improve our readiness of our fleet by being more proactive in replacing the components most likely to break and to avoid any additional breakage from those things happening at a time that we maybe didn't want them to break. So that's been big. We've also been able to use more commercially available algorithms for learning. So as part of Digital U, we have an assessment engine where you could say, hey, in my next career, when I'm done doing awesome interviews for the Mitchell Institute, and just making our country a safer, better place by uniting thinkers, you could say, you know what, I want to be a software developer. So we have an engine where you could go and you could say, hey, I want to be a software developer. And it kind of goes through and it'll look at the skills that you have. And it might say, actually, we think you'd be a better data scientist. And you can say, well, that sounds awesome. How do I get there? And it'll put you on a learning path. Or you could say, no, I really do want to be a software developer. And it'll show you, okay, you have a little bit more work to do here, but here's your path. And we can see kind of what is your progression along the way. And we can do a lot more with data to basically take raw elements that people have that maybe we didn't hire them to be a software developer, but maybe they have a high probability of succeeding in another field and we want to really give them a shot. I like to think of it as the under siege principle. Your best fighter is the cook. No one saw it coming. I mean, he was a trained Navy SEAL, so maybe they should have seen it coming. But we have a lot of folks that have incredible skill sets in their personal lives, but we didn't hire them for that thing. And today we need them to do that high-tech job. So we're doing more of that as well.
Well, that's fascinating, actually, as you brought up the issue of humanitarian response, disaster relief. It is amazing how information technologies have changed since the 2004, 2005 timeframe. Heck, we were just trying to get overhead imagery that was releasable to our friends and allies in the region. In the intelligence community, wouldn't declassify the information. Today, you just go to the internet and you don't even need a credit card. But if you want really reliable data, you can pay for it and get it right off the bat.
Absolutely. And actually, what you just said, some of the drivers behind that have been absolutely fascinating too. Declassifying top secret intelligence reports that we never would have declassified before, but that when we declassify them, it shows exactly some of the things that our enemies are doing, that when the public can see them and when the international public can see them, they see what we do. And I think that in some ways, we have to protect certain things.
Sure.
Because we don't want to give away sources and methods. We don't want our
Right.
sources to be hurt. We don't necessarily want to give up how we collected something. But sometimes when we do share that data, it helps for people to see just how bad things are in some places. And I think that we allowed some of the worldviews to get a little bit too rosy for a little bit. And I think people see very clearly the world that we live in at the moment, and that there are real threats that we do have to come together for our shared values.
Yeah, no, I think you raised an excellent point. The Department of Defense Administration really should be applauded for doing what you just described in the early stages and ongoing in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, and that's made a big difference in solidifying the coalition. So now kind of taking a look at our adversaries, they're developing their own information-centric strategies and the systems to support them and to deny ours too. So from your perspective, what are the biggest challenges that we can expect to face in this kind of future informationalized warfighting environment?
So, I mean, there are a lot of challenges. I mean, if you just look in the Department of Defense at the same challenges we've talked about over the last 20 years, acquisition reform, IT modernization, the incredible scale that we deal with, really trying to have all of those pieces come together and get out of our own way. You know, those are the biggest challenges. The macro challenges, it's a race. Who can invest smartly and execute really well? Who has the best ConOps? Who can also operate best on a bad day? We are really good at operating on a bad day. We could actually lose most of our systems, and if our adversary lost their systems too, we would crush anyone. Like, we know how to have that lone pilot go and conduct that mission. But this is a new day and age. There are so many things that come together on the complexity of the battlefield. I do expect information to be front and center for any future battles. I think that most nations want to avoid kind of the attrition that comes from the kinetic fight in favor of a more quiet cyber war. And as the Chinese would say, keeping it harmonious. So it definitely is an interesting environment that we live in. Some of the things that we're getting through those challenges by focusing on the work at hand and getting the engineers in the room to really make some decisions together and to just pick a couple things that we can really, really execute. But the other challenge is the real bang, the real game-changing effect doesn't come into play until you have the convergence of a number of different things. And so zero trust in itself, JADC2 in itself, those are big convergence things, convergence concepts. I can roll out enterprise ICAM. A lot of people will be very excited about that because they know what the heck does that mean. But until I have a bunch of other capabilities together that allow me to achieve more of a zero trust future where I can collapse domains, where I can simplify my environment. We were talking earlier offline about sometimes you can't get access to something because it was blocked, the link was blocked. In a zero trust future, we avoid some of those problems, but it takes building a couple of things on top of each other. Likewise with software. We have historically been pretty stovepiped. You could have incredible software in a location, but you may not be able to share that data as seamlessly as you would like, or with that same common operating picture with someone halfway around the world, unless you have first solved some infrastructure items, your hybrid cloud strategy, determined exactly where you're sensing and inferencing with your edge device algorithms versus your cloud. So there are a lot of things that come together that kind of make the magic happen. And I think over the next 5 years, we're going to see more of those things building on each other to see a little bit more bang. But on the way, you have a lot of folks doing a lot of work that lays that foundation that will have smaller effects in things like user experience and cybersecurity and governance effects. Sometimes we'll be able to maybe shut something down because we're able to do it as an enterprise. But those are all core challenges. And I'll tell you, the big so what is, it is a race to see who can gain that decision advantage, that cognitive advantage, who can have the fastest literal and proverbial kill chain. And so we have to get it right. We know it. We're investing, and we are doing our best to row together. Every now and then, we're going to have to pull someone out of another boat and be like, all right, come on, guys.
Sure.
But that is, at least we recognize it. We're working very hard toward it.
That's great to hear. And obviously, you put your finger on the most important button as we look to the future, because if we see the rise in the capabilities of our adversaries at the same time, excuse me, our hardware, if you will, has declined. So we're going to have to rely on that decision advantage to be able to overcome our adversaries, which, let me segue into a related area, and that's the importance of information technology as we go down the road to developing ABMS and the concept in support of joint all-domain command and control. Can you share with our audience a little bit about just how important some of the foundational technologies in IT are with respect to getting to that vision? And the other point I wanted to highlight in your remarks, you really, I think, made a good point that, you know, both ABMS and JADC2, it's not a day we're going to say, okay, we got it. It's really more of a journey on how we get better in providing the capabilities to achieve an advantage in that kill chain. But could you talk a little bit more about IT in support of JADC2, ABMS?
Sure. So I'll say the day that we can really say we have JADC2 is the day we're working out of Ender's Game.
Yeah.
So I mean, I'd say that's kind of, we're really reaching our goals. I would say that IT is not just critical to JADC2, but just JADC2 doesn't exist without all of the, without all of the tech stack. I think largely if you take the tech stack and you add the ConOps and kind of the needs of the warfighter, you've got JADC2 kind of at that point. And so those components, you do not have JADC2 without being able to grab a connection, without having compute, without having the data that you need, without having the software that you need. And then, of course, as we're moving toward intelligent warfare, if you are not leveraging algorithm, if you are not changing your ConOps, if you still have 12 steps in your kill chain and they are still automated, or somebody is still doing swivel chair to move data from one system to another, then your adversary's kill chain is going to be faster. And so I tend to focus on the tech side of JADC2. We have really smart people that are focused on the ConOps side of JADC2, but we recognize that the ConOps is both warfighting and technical. What is a warfighting effect that I have to achieve? In what domain? How am I working together? Not just with us, but with our DIB partners and with our allies. And so that is huge to recognize, but also how are we going to leverage that technology and how do we make it as easy as possible? So I'm sure you remember probably using some systems where you had to go through 3 years of training to understand how to use the system. We don't want our system to be quite that complex in the future. And we have gotten to a point where you can show up and be, proficient a lot sooner if you have basic data skills, if you can use an iPhone. You don't go through a month of training to use your iPhone.
Right.
And so that user-centered design piece, it also sounds super fluffy, but it means that when you show up and you need to put in place that warfighting effect, that you're not trying to figure out a complex system to do it, that you have the data at your fingertips, you can make the decisions that you need to, that your kill chain, once you make a decision, it's going to be relatively automated and be able to carry out exactly what you expect it to carry out.
All right. Now, I think, again, you hit on some great points in the context. It's not just about technology either. It's about, human design, the entire panoply of .mil, PF, FT, whatever the latest, acronym on or letter on top of that acronym is. But it's going to be all those parts and pieces. Let's shift gears a little bit. And you mentioned zero trust before. Can you tell us a little bit more about your vision for zero trust and why it's important? And when do you expect to have a working system up and running that'll allow for constant validation by system users?
Absolutely. So first, the reason that zero trust is so incredibly important in a warfighting construct is that we want to get it to a world where we can fight in one environment with our joint partners, our DIB partners, and our allies. We don't want to be logging into 22 different networks to try to talk to 22 different people. We can't be in an AOC with people having different access to different things and having to log into different machines and redact documents and run up and down stairs. That is not the speed of kill chain that that's going to help us win. And so zero trust is a core principle of getting to that future world where we can fight together with our joint partners and our allies. Because zero trust inherently looks at the identity of the person, who are you, or the non-person entity, and constantly challenges that person. Also looks at the data. Should you have access to this piece of data? What about this piece of data? And are you allowed to have access to this piece of data perpetually or just for this moment in time? If I know something about you and I know something about the data and I have an automated way to validate that, then I can sit there all day and I can make sure that you are supposed to have that. I don't have to do whitelisting. I don't have to block certain things and allow certain things. I equally distrust everything, but I can very easily validate what is happening. And so what I can start to do is, maybe I don't need an unclassified environment and a secret environment. Maybe I have one environment where things are segmented enough where I can just see what I can see. I don't have to worry about logging into two different places. My partners in that AOC, we're all there fighting together. I don't necessarily have to stand up a separate network so I control it so that I can share everything that I need with my allies there, because that just means that at that point in time, I'm set. I need to be able to set up an environment so I can now share that with, if we have to disperse and work from, wherever we have to work from, or if we have to disperse globally, I still need to be able to share that information. If I need to bring in new allies in a conflict, I need to be able to share all the information that I can share, and it needs to be very easy. I can change rules within a system easily, but if I have to go through and manually make changes to the eaches, I'm not going to get there. So for a lot of that reason, Zero Trust, we recognize, is one of the most dear capabilities to the future fight. Not because it's, cool tech. It is cool tech. But because it allows us to simplify our environment and it makes us inherently more secure. And I'll tell you, just in general with Zero Trust, kind of the analogy that I use, it's a little bit annoying, but with automation would not be. So the way that we do things now, we're kind of like a traditional movie theater. You show your ticket, and as long as I see your ticket, you can go on in. I might not know if it's a forged ticket. Maybe you snuck in behind someone else. It's not, or maybe you snuck in a back door when someone opened it up. But once you're in the theater, I kind of leave you alone. You can just kind of, you can go see 4 movies that day if you feel like it. But with Zero Trust, I'm checking your ticket when you come into the theater. As you're walking around, I'm still saying, hey, can I see your ticket? I'm validating if that ticket is real. I'm using a barcode. Did someone else use that ticket? I'm constantly looking at it. Oh, that movie was over an hour ago. You shouldn't still be here. While you're sitting in your seat, I'm still saying, oh, is this your ticket? Is this your ticket? Is this your ticket? But I'm not interrupting your movie in Zero Trust because I have automation happening behind the scenes. You don't see it. It is seamless to you. But I know that you were there before because you were supposed to be, but it's because I inherently don't trust you. It's because I'm constantly asking. If we do that with every piece of data across our enterprise, it's pretty hard to maintain perpetual access across our networks. Now, it is very, very hard to do this. It took Google about 10 years with their Zero Trust effort. Of course, they were the first pioneering Zero Trust, but we have a pretty good plan. We released our strategy about a year ago. DoD just released their strategy, which we support. Our implementation plans are converging, and we're actually making decisions together across the entire DoD on Zero Trust. Imagine a world, 10 years ago, people would have laughed when I said, the CIOs of the departments and the director of DISA, who's also a great Air Force general, General Skinner over there, we all agree largely on how we're going to do ICAM, and we're going to do it together. We all largely agree on how we're going to go about doing SD-WAN, and we are going to do this together. Just agreeing on the tech and deciding to be an enterprise and making sure that we are as aligned as possible, leveraging our defense base, traditional and non-traditional again, to go after this. It all is a pretty cool time to be in a tech exec job in the department.
Oh, that's great. You actually anticipated my next question, which was going to be how you work with the rest of the Department of Defense, but you answered that. Let me ask one point. Let's take it one more stage in the context of what about wider whole of government and international partner efforts and effects?
So, we work with our international partners every single day, especially overseas. And depending on the region we're in, depending on the conflict we're in, that may look differently. We're working a lot with our European allies right now. We're working more, of course, with Ukraine than we ever have before. And we're doing some pretty interesting things. I guess necessity drives invention. We've actually been able to share information pretty much more seamlessly with our European allies because of the conflict. I think that there's definitely opportunity for us to co-develop more technology. And our allies, especially our Five Eyes partners, have some pretty interesting zero trust efforts of their own that allow us to also share information pretty seamlessly, as well as partnerships with the NSA, the intelligence community in general, with those allies. So I think that our partnerships are strong, which is good because that's part of our national defense strategy, is to have those strong allied relationships. I think we're using integrated deterrence very effectively across the world right now as well, and that is a good news story. But I think certainly as we get the information domain right, and as we simplify things, and we are able to leverage zero trust principles, those partnerships get even easier. Because again, even as tight as those partnerships are, we're still working on multiple networks until we're able to simplify that domain.
Yeah, and I don't want to get too technical or detailed here, but could you talk a little bit about, you mentioned Five Eyes, okay, great, we've got established relationships with Five Eyes, but how's Zero Trust going to enable information sharing with partners and others that don't normally have regular access to our classified information? You kind of alluded to that with respect to, okay, we're working a lot with Ukraine. Well, they didn't used to, they're certainly not one of the Five Eyes partners. Yeah. But can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So, I mean, we don't just share with Five Eyes. We share with a lot of different countries around the world. I don't think that we always necessarily say publicly who all of the folks are, but we can release to anyone that we're approved to release to, and we work with a lot of countries around the world. And so, pick a country. If it's classified as secret releasable to that country, it can go. That can be a zero trust rule. And we have systems even in place today, even commercially available systems, where you can see either that report or parts of that report if you have access to it. And if you don't have access to it, then it just, it doesn't exist in your workspace. So it's not just Five Eyes. Of course, we have very long-standing, tight-knit relationships and mature processes with Five Eyes, but we also have very mature, strong relationships with a lot of other allies. And I was really thrilled to get to see some of that firsthand with my Asia trip in September and October, just how strong some of our allied relationships are in that region as well.
Well, very good. Let's take a look at some acquisition perspectives, if you will. We do hear a lot about the Department of Defense and the Air Force wanting to bring in non-traditional vendors. But when we talk to many of these companies, we see two primary barriers or disincentives to doing business with the Department of Defense and the Air Force: classification requirements, and then the extended timelines of defense acquisition. How's your office dealing with these challenges?
So first, I'll share that, we talk about traditional and non-traditional, but it's kind of hilarious in a way, because we'll be like, oh, Google, they're a non-traditional company. Microsoft and Amazon, they are a non-traditional company. Everywhere else, they are a household name. Right. And if we're being honest, they are now household names in the Department of Defense. A lot of those big tech companies that used to be non-traditional, they are now working very, very closely with our more traditional defense industrial base. And then we have other players that are kind of up and coming, that started out smaller, were venture backed, but they are focused on defense. Companies like Anduril, Rebellion Defense. Palantir, of course, grew up out of the intelligence community, but they are increasingly doing just some really great work for the Department of Defense. So these companies are sort of non-traditional, but they're right in the middle of it, and they're developing capability for us, as well as, of course, in the case of the big tech companies, dual use. There are small companies that stand up just to do work for the government, and then there are small companies that are dual use. For the dual use companies, I tend to advise folks to start on the commercial market, because it is faster. You can test your concept. If it's really, really great in the commercial market, the government's probably going to want to use it too. The government's not a great place to just test it and see if it worked, unless you know that's exactly what you're doing. We're actually awesome for phase one SBIRs, for instance, where I have no idea if it's going to work. I have no idea if there's even a commercial market, but I want to test this capability and see what happens. And we actually spend about $1 billion a year on our SBIR program. So, and the bar to entry is pretty low. Like, if we have a need and we think that you might be able to even look at early stage technology that might be valuable to our mission. We have a lot of folks that come in, but it is hard to, not as many companies kind of get through that valley of death and really end up operational. Sometimes intentionally, maybe it wasn't as big of a hit to our mission as we thought. Sometimes it does need to go prove itself commercially first. But we do have AFWorks as that front door. We have lowered the bar for SBIR. It is much more of a venture model where you can get that initial investment, you can scale it up to a 2, up to a 3. And once you get a SBIR, you actually can get a sole source contract from the government if your technology is something that we need, or if your concept, whatever it is that you developed as part of that SBIR. So that's pretty cool. And we actually give some good resources to those companies. Our CISO shop actually does something called Blue Cyber, where they educate those companies on the security requirements for the government so that it's a little bit easier to kind of build in the cyber and privacy requirements that we have so that doesn't kind of cause kinks later down the road. Partnering is a huge thing too. I see a lot more of our big companies partnering, especially with disadvantaged small businesses, and mentoring those companies and bringing them into big bids. Because a small company, isn't going to be able to spend the hundreds of thousands of dollars to put in a huge bid, but they could do smaller bids. And we have a lot of procurements that go through that are just for small businesses, just for 8As. And then, of course, we have a lot of sub-content built into our large deals, where a small company that has something that really adds to the fight can talk to the primes and be part of the team. And so I think we do have mechanisms, like in any business, a small business in the DoD, you got to hustle, you got to network, you have to have something that other people don't have. And just like the commercial markets, it is really, really hard. But I think we have some pretty good mechanisms in place and some good education for the folks that are really hungry to go get it.
Awesome. And well, this has been a fascinating discussion so far, and it's not over with yet, but what I'd like to do is open up the session to questions from our audience. And I know our audience knows the drill by now, but when I do call on you, please unmute your mic and then state your name and affiliation before asking your question. Or you can submit your questions using the Q&A function on the app. So with that, let's jump right in. Let me take a quick look here and see if we've got any live hands up. Seeing none, let's go to the chat and have a first question here from Sarah Breen. Your example about stormtroopers in Clarendon highlights the dangers of disinformation. How may the Air Force better manage or combat disinformation? Training, awareness, policy? What do you think?
So I'm so glad that I got a question about stormtroopers in Arlington. I cannot wait for the Twitter hashtags later today. And we'll see if stormtrooper costume sales go up, from this interview. But we actually are pretty aware of this and have launched an education campaign for our airmen. I guess a simple way to put it is kind of how to be safe online. And honestly, I have 2 little kids. I'm so glad that they're not surfing the internet by themselves yet. But as they do, definitely I will be educating them more. I was at a fascinating dinner party the other night where the host asked us a question, what is something that's not obvious that you are optimistic about? And one of the folks mentioned that kids that are growing up right now have a really good BS meter. And specifically, what he meant by that was that kids, because they are used to seeing so many ridiculous sources online, the kids that grew up in this age are getting better at saying, that's not real. Of course, there are not stormtroopers going through Clarendon. And if they are, it's a parade at Star Wars Day. This is not something I need to be worried about. Whereas folks that grew up with the internet as more of a source of truth, where journalists really dove into their sources and took it as a sense of pride, and where we didn't have a world where you were paid by the click. Our young people are getting it kind of through inherent training. Our young airmen, we were trying to make sure that we train them, and also our folks that are more mature audiences. Just how do you really look at the source and tell if this is true? And just be aware of it. So we have looked at that. We also, I think that our government is also talking a little bit more in general, not just in the DoD, about how do we protect our public from disinformation.
How about Eric Adolphi?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep, got you.
Gotcha.
Excellent. This has been great, and I was very, very encouraged to hear about the emphasis on SIBRs. We're a SIBR company. We hold a number of SIBRs related to zero trust devices, working with partners at NSA and also Air Force. Our challenge is that even though we're phase 1 and phase 2, when we do go to speak with partners within the Air Force about potentially integrating into their ecosystems, they really don't understand the SIBR program, and we get a lot of I don't want to say pushback, but we get a lot of sort of like, hey, you need to go talk to AFWERX, and we try to explain this is a phase 3 opportunity, and they don't quite understand what that means, and so we've been struggling with that, and and then a lot of times the contracting officers won't speak to us, and we try to explain. We give them the policy directives, and and they just don't think that they can speak with us as vendors. How would you suggest we go about educating the community about how do you go about doing this?
Yeah, so that's definitely something, I can put you in touch with Colonel Diller over at AFWERX to raise that as a concern. Certainly, we could educate folks more if you're kind of running into challenges there. Not everyone knows that, hey, once you have a SIBR phase 2, that we can pretty much just sole source you a SIBR phase 3. But the broader challenge there is sometimes if you are experimenting with a piece of a technology while the enterprise is rapidly trying to scale that technology, you're almost behind the curve. So I think that is probably the broader problem here, is taking a look at the zero trust strategy. Where do you fit in? Maybe working with the existing vendors that are on contract to do different parts of the stack. And if you think that there is a part that is missing in the stack that you fill specifically, helping to educate the engineers on what exactly that is. And that is something that can happen in our CTO office. That's something that can happen in our lead command or in our PEO that is integrating this. But it may very well be that, just we have something that is not temporally aligned. And that is a big challenge, actually, everywhere, not just in the DoD. You have things in the lab that are developing great capability. Meanwhile, the enterprise is adopting mature technologies at scale, and you have to find kind of where the insertion point is after the plane's already taken off at that point. But we can connect you to Colonel Diller, or if you want to send me a brief on the tech, if I see a gap in our current strategy that you could fill, then I'm happy to make some connections there. I'll also be very open that we may not be ready to fill that gap at this point. We may need to kind of get some foundational pieces in order, or we may have that piece filled. And that's just one of those things in an enterprise of this size, where if you don't fill a gap today, it may be that maybe we need to develop the technology a little bit more so that we can kind of catch a gap tomorrow when the enterprise is ready to catch you. So timing is really, really important.
Thank you. Excellent. Thank you.
Lauren, here's one from Mitchell Institute follower at Arizona State University. Back in August, you couldn't reveal specifics on budget numbers, but you said if things go as expected with the president's budget in the palm, there should be a windfall for the department's IT, particularly in FY24. Can you say any more at this point, and are you still as confident?
I'll say I'm even more confident, but I still can't share numbers until it's in the president's budget. But yes, the POM took cyber, IT, and comm very, very seriously. And we continue to have additional iterations that continue to fill gaps as we do move toward this zero trust world, and as we do lay the foundation for JADC2. So I would say that our country is taking investment in this technology very seriously right now. I remain confident, and I have a lot of folks working really, really hard to make sure that the day that those dollars drop, we are spending it very smartly.
Here's one from Zach Rosenberg at Janes. Can you kindly elaborate on AI incorporation into air platforms? You mentioned AI for search and rescue as an example. Are we there yet? Where is the Air Force, the U.S., on integrating AI into specific operational tasks? What are the challenges? What do we still need to accomplish? And what timeline should we anticipate to seeing AI commonplace in the real world? That's a lot of questions, but I think you get the gist.
Well, I'd say AI is commonplace in the real world now. It's just not commonplace in the real world everywhere in the Department of Defense. And part of that is because it's a lot easier to do AI at scale when you're already in the cloud. You already have really clean training quality data that you've been collecting across a large populace legally for decades. But within the Department of Defense, I think about it two ways. One, our secretary has said a few times that in the future, we expect AI to just be a part of all of our weapons platforms. And so that is definitely notable in that as we build out capabilities of the future, it'll be in the statement of work that we have this capability. As far as battle management software, we use algorithms today to do certain things. We will use algorithms to do more things. We will have better data and more training quality data to do those things. We are already pretty well on our way with computer vision, being able to look at imagery and tell what is that thing? Is that a truck? Is that a tank? Is that a missile? Is it moving? Is it stationary? Maybe what is the pattern? There are a lot of things that we can already do. I would say over time, as we get our infrastructure house in order, as we have more things in a cloud-based architecture, and as we adopt concepts such as ICAM and SD-WAN, which will be happening over the next 2 years at scale, it becomes a lot easier to get data from anywhere to anywhere. It gets a lot easier to have a more cohesive AI strategy. Much more like, for instance, I drive a Tesla. I'm a huge fan. And generally, I'll explain kind of training of a fleet of algorithms like I would explain my car, where you do train the fleet in the cloud. You have a lot of data in the cloud from hundreds of thousands, millions of different endpoints in this place, a car. But everything that I need at the edge is on the car. So if there's something that's going to save my life in an accident, it's not waiting for a connection. It acts. It's going to take the action that it needs to. The airbag is going to deploy. Maybe the auto drive will make an adjustment for me to save my life. But that next pothole, I'm going to get the latest intelligence when I get a connection. And I think that we know that that's the right architecture, but globally distributed in our security environment to this point has been harder to train algorithms in the cloud and push them to the edge exactly when we need them. And so, and we haven't embedded AI into our 20-year-old air platforms consistently. Some of them we have. So I'd say that we are on the right path. We still have some work to do both in the lab and on the battlefield, but I'm really excited to see some of the developments in some of the newer defense industrial base companies, like Anduril, for instance. Everything they do starts from a point of autonomous systems. More of our software starts from a point of there is going to be an algorithm handling that. So I think we're on the right path, and I think that we're going to see in about 5 years, we're going to see a convergence of some really interesting things happening at scale.
Okay, let's go back to live questions. We've got one from Donna Rogers. Donna?
Thank you so much. Thank you for the very insightful comments that you've had so far. it's been very interesting to hear what you've been saying about the AI. And actually, my question had to do with the future of the AI and how that would be integrated. So you actually answered it. So I'll pass on that. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks. We'll pat ourselves on the back here in the studio.
Okay, I'm going to combine a couple. One from Mr. Doug Berkey at Mitchell Institute and Lauren Williams. We hear a lot about the Space Force via Derek Tournier's team building the space transport layer to facilitate JADC2. This obviously needs to connect with our terrestrial networks and IT systems. Could you please speak to the type of collaboration you and his team are pursuing to ensure seamless connectivity and resilience? And sort of the other piece is also, how are you working with Brigadier General Cropsey, the Program Executive Officer for Management on JADC2?
Absolutely. So first, so Derek is brilliant, doing really great things for our force, and Luke Cropsey is exactly the right person to be doing the integration PEO. So Luke is easy, General Cropsey, in that, so he is the integration PEO. And so the things that I dream up in strategy and requirements, and the things that General High Note, our A57Q High Note, the things that we dream up, and the warfighter requirements that come, General Cropsey is responsible for executing those requirements. And so we work together in making sure that our roadmaps are integrated, and that we're not solving the same problem multiple times, or when we are, that we find the convergence as quickly as we possibly can, the convergence in terms of effect as well as funding. And then with Derek, Dr. Trudeau, what I would say is that in the future, we don't care what connectivity we have. We don't care what transport we have. We will take any transport and we will use it. And so space transport is just one more type of transport that we will increasingly use toward mission effect. Space compute as well. So in that future zero trust world where we don't care, Derek basically makes sure that transport is available to us. Some other folks are making sure that space transport is available to us, just like we have fiber and mobile and Wi-Fi coverage, cellular coverage, 5G, LTE, whatever we can grab. Same thing for our aerial networks. We're converging more around IP standards in our aerial networks. We're not there yet, but that's where we're headed. And so once we are able to adopt things like true SD-WAN technology, we care even less what our transport is, especially if we are able to protect that data in transport across whatever transport mesh we're on. That is how those things integrate when we kind of break it down to its pieces.
Okay, we're coming up to the end of our session. However, this is a really interesting question here. It's from Nathan at the John F. Kennedy Elementary School. So automatically I'm suspicious with respect to your analogy to stormtroopers in Clarendon, but still it's a cool question. Here's his question. No matter how cool our computers are, we still use dumb keyboards. My teacher says keyboards go way back 200 years. Will you invent easier ways to work on a computer? Aim high.
Oh, I love it. We could actually still make some improvements to our actual computers today. So I'll say that what we do need is some way for humans to interact with data, which is a very non-tangible thing, but we have to be able to touch it in a tangible way because we're humans and we have to manipulate a physical world. Keyboards are one way. But hey, Minority Report shows us some pretty good examples of what the future could be with regard to AR/VR. And actually, we're doing some pretty cool stuff across the Department of the Air Force with AR/VR, with our maintainers, and with our pilots. And AR/VR, in some cases, it's gotten so good that you really can feel like you were there and experiencing something. And so I think that there will be increasing use cases where we are using AR and VR and where we are moving something throughout a battle space, for instance. Keyboards are really great for kind of the tactical feel of conveying words to digital paper. Although it's funny, I was talking with some of my friends the other day about how when I write something in a notebook, I actually remember it more than if I type it onto a piece of paper. And maybe that's just because that's where I started in school. I wonder if kids that are starting typing everything, will they remember more when they type it? People that start more in an AR, VR world where they are kind of in a simulated environment, tactically moving the world around them, even though they're not really, but they feel that they are. Are they going to remember that kind of more kinesthetic learning in an AR, VR space? So it's definitely a fascinating look. I think we have options, but I think for the next few years, we'll be doing our business, our day-to-day business and numbers, probably with keywords, and our battle space and training increasingly with AR, VR.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, we've come to the end of our Aerospace Nation event today. I really want to thank Lauren, you for taking the time for being here today and giving us those great perspectives. We wish you all the best in your endeavors. And to you and our audience, we wish you all having a great aerospace power kind of day.